Hey everyone, I'm Asha. Welcome to the GTHQ weekly wrap up. If you've been following my channel, any of my videos, you'll know I had a bit of a break. I went away over the summer and now I'm back, ready to make some more videos and talk about some important issues. So let's get down to business. If you're living in the US, you can't escape the stories about domestic violence in the NFL, and that's what I wanted to talk about today. While domestic violence in the NFL specifically has been an ongoing issue for many years, it kind of came to a bit of a watershed moment recently when a video was leaked of ex-Baltimore Ravens player Ray Rice dragging his wife out of an elevator, basically beating her up. It was a pretty shocking video and it made us confront the issue of domestic violence in the NFL in such a big way. After this video was released by gossip site TMZ, Ray Rice was dropped from his team and he's been suspended by the NFL. Now I'm just going to rewind a little bit too, because the NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell recently released a memorandum talking about the issue of domestic violence in the NFL. Now, if you want to see the full document and everything he wrote about, click on the link below, which I have included. But basically he was saying, if you're a first-time offender, you're going to be suspended. If you're a repeat offender, it's a lifetime ban from the NFL. Apart from these harsher penalties, they're also going to be implementing support and education programs within the NFL for players, for coaches, for owners, for families, and for everyone involved in the NFL so that they understand it's not as black and white as we think. But because the NFL hasn't actually specifically banned Ray Rice after this shocking video has been released, people are now calling for Roger Goodell to basically be fired. My basic opinion is that domestic violence is not a black and white issue. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach in terms of tackling it, and victims deserve to have a voice. Now, it's not just women, it's men too. Domestic violence affects men and women, not necessarily evenly, but it does affect both genders. So I wanted to start off with a few stats and figures about domestic violence in the US and globally. Also, I should point out that this week is actually the 20th anniversary of the Violence Against Women Act, which was signed into law here in America. Basically, the act implements harsher penalties for rapists, for sex offenders, for anyone committing violent acts against an intimate partner. And thanks to the Violence Against Women Act, between 1993 and 2010, the rate of intimate partner crimes decreased by 67% according to the White House. That's a huge number and it reiterates why we need a law like this. 85% of domestic violence incidences reported in the US are against women. 1 in 4 women experience intimate partner violence in their lifetime. That's pretty shocking. And it equals to 1.3 million women a year. 1 in 5 women are victims of rape here in the United States. And 1 in every 13 murder victims is a woman that is killed by her husband or boyfriend. Now, on a global scale, the United Nations says 35% of women around the world have experienced some sort of intimate partner crime or domestic abuse in their lifetime. So that gives you an idea of what women in the US and women around the world are facing. Now, because I am a feminist, I do believe in true equality, so I wanted to give some facts and figures on how men fit into this conversation. So I started doing some research on how men fare in the domestic violence issue, what are the stats and figures relating to them, and I found some pretty shocking evidence. So when I typed in Google domestic violence stats against men globally and against men in the United States, Google kept auto-correcting my search saying, did you mean domestic violence statistics against women? And I thought that was a pretty telling sign, right? The fact that there's comprehensive information about violence against women, but that the information about violence against men is so hard to find, means that this issue is even bigger than we think. And while we focus on how the NFL is tackling this issue and the violence against women, the fact is, if we truly believe that men are part of the conversation, we have to look at them as not just perpetrators. A survey by the Centers for Disease Control, or CDC, in 2010 stated 40% of victims of severe domestic violence are in fact men. And 63% of men have had a deadly weapon used against them in a fight with an intimate partner. So this is the other reason why I wanted to bring it up. Initially, I wanted to talk about how men can be part of the conversation in helping women and educating each other and bringing the issue to light, not just relying on women to fight for their rights. But as I started researching, I realized, men are part of this more than we think. The fact that I found it hard to find domestic violence statistics relating to men as victims is a very telling sign. It means this whole issue of domestic violence is so fragmented. How can we fully understand what's going on behind the scenes if we're not given all the information that we need? Women may not have enough of a voice from an institutional and systemic level where organizations such as the NFL sweep it under the carpet because they're more inclined to focus on their superstar players, but men don't have a voice in the sense that there isn't enough money being put toward funding studies into how men are victims out there and how men are affected by domestic violence. That's really, really sad to me as a woman and as a feminist. I believe men should have a voice in this too. I think the more we as men and women stand alongside each other and understand the complexities of domestic violence, perhaps this issue will be tackled in much better ways and handled publicly in better ways than what the NFL and what the media is doing. Because men, as part of the domestic violence conversation, shouldn't just be seen as perpetrators or preventers or protectors. According to these statistics, they are also victims. So why shouldn't these men stand alongside these women who are victims and say, hey, you know what, let's tackle this together? Just an example of how complex domestic violence is. Look at the reaction from Ray Rice's wife, Janae. Now, back when the video was released or when it was shot in the elevator, I believe it was February 2014, they were engaged, but they weren't married. She married him after that incident. And since the whole incident has been blown out in the media, she's publicly stood by her husband saying, please leave him alone, give us our privacy. I'm choosing to stand by him. I'm choosing to stay with him. His career in the NFL shouldn't be jeopardized. And a lot of people are like, well, come on, it's too soon for you to stand up for your husband because he's abusive, blah, blah, blah. And while that may be well and true, it just shows us once again how complex it is. And you can't just put a victim in a box and say, all right, they've been a victim of domestic violence and domestic abuse. These are the actions that they need to take. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Another interesting fact which I read was that 12 NFL players have been arrested since 2005 for domestic assault, and they're still playing right now in this current season. I think a lot of people are kind of pissed off with the way the NFL and Commissioner Roger Goodell has handled this, and a parody Twitter account for comedian Chris Rock tweeted this awesome statement. Just to be clear, Ray Rice was not fired for beating his wife. He was fired because a video of him beating his wife was released. What that indicates is that the NFL knows about these incidents. They've heard about them. They've been out there in the public even. But because it's a video, now they have to take it seriously. But I don't want to make this issue just about the NFL because domestic violence exists in and of itself aside from a major sporting league. It's the issue of domestic violence, and it's the issue of how we treat victims from a media perspective and how we tackle this issue as various institutions, whether it's the NFL, whether it's the government, whether it's private organizations, whether it's your workplace, whether it's your family setting. How do we tackle domestic violence? How do we educate people enough to realize that not every victim has the same situation, and that talking about this issue publicly is only the first step. We need to have everyday people being empowered to share their stories and the experiences that they've been through. What the TMZ video did was basically allow so many other victims to come forward and say, you know what, I've been in that situation, whether they're an NFL spouse or not. So if this is happening just the NFL, imagine stories about domestic violence in just everyday life and other industries that are now going to be brought to light thanks to this issue being played out in the media. Men and women need to stand together, and yes, there are definitely more female victims of domestic violence in the US and around the world, but that doesn't mean we've got to ignore the percentage of men that do fall victim to this crime. It's not us versus them. It's not a gender issue. It's not an institution versus everyday citizens issue. It's a humanity issue. If we ignore the cries of a select few, what does that mean for the rest of us? We ourselves shouldn't have to go through a domestic violence or an abusive experience just to empathize and realize how serious it is. The hashtag that has been used this week in reference to this issue is hashtag why I stayed, and obviously it specifically references Janae Rice's story and her public statement of standing by her husband. And she's not the only one who stayed with her perpetrator and stayed with her abuser. So once again, people are now empowered to have these conversations in a public forum on social media, explaining why they stayed and not feeling judged or criticized because of their decisions. If people are empowered to share their voice and people are willing to have the guts to speak up about such a taboo issue like domestic violence, others should be willing to hear and others should be willing to understand and put things in place to tackle this issue from a more informed point of view. All right, so these are my thoughts on the issue of domestic violence in the NFL. And it's also kind of enlightened me to think about domestic violence just on a larger social level, and how as a woman who is specifically focused on women's issues and women's rights and feminism, if I truly stand for equality, which is what a lot of feminists say, then I am going to include men in this conversation, and I do want to talk about it from their point of view too. So I really hope that some of these facts and figures have been informative to you. And I know I'm not the only one with an opinion on this, so please leave your comments below. Tell me what you think about the issue of domestic violence in the NFL. Have they handled it correctly? I want to give you the chance and empower you to share your story, whether it be below, or if you want to write a blog post about it, please check out my website, girltalkhq.com. I'm all about empowering women and men to share their stories online. And please don't forget to subscribe to this channel, because every week I will be bringing a video about an important topic that I feel affects women, because I believe in the power of raising my voice. So thank you for watching this video. Subscribe to this channel and I will see you next time.